It was a dark and stormy night. Mary Stevens was walking home, winding her way down rain-slicked streets and cobblestone crossways. With her path lit by the flickering glow of street lamps, Mary was undaunted by the cold, determined to make it back before sunrise. But her hurried stroll came to a halt when someone, or something, skittered out of an alleyway and pounced on her. The man, if indeed that's what he was, pinned Mary's arms behind her back as he held her in place. From the corner of her eye, she saw a forked tongue slither out his mouth. He licked her face. But perhaps even worse than his reptilian tongue were his claws, which Mary later said were as cold and clammy as those of a corpse. Thankfully, her scream was enough to scare away the monster man. He was gone before the awakened neighbors had time to peer through their windows. A search was launched to find the culprit, but no man nor beast was ever uncovered. This, however, would not be the last of him. In fact, this was only the beginning. Because on that dark and stormy night, the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack was born. We interrupt this video for an important message. All I'm asking, baby, is please, please, please like and subscribe. Yeah, so please like and subscribe. I need the validation. Anyway, we now return to the previously scheduled video. Subsequent reports described him as having pointed ears, a set of horns, a shrill cackle, and glowing red eyes. Your archetypal demon, Jack wasn't defying any stereotypes, but hey, the look is classic for a reason. Another terrifying trademark was his ability to leap up and over great heights. He could hop 10-foot fences with ease. But it wasn't all tricks and treats with this jumping Jack Slash. He had claws, and he was not afraid to use them, as Mary Stevens discovered when he tore her clothes. But even setting that aside, Jack's parkour prowess was also a danger, at least once he developed a habit of leaping in front of carriages. He'd spook the horses and scare the coachmen, supposedly resulting in crashes. None of them fatal, though all of them leaving drivers with serious injuries. Of course, as is always the case with such fantastical stories, we're left with one big question. Was any of it real? In the Alsop home, all was quiet that evening. Upstairs, Mr. Alsop, a wealthy businessman, reviewed papers in his study while his 18-year-old daughter Jane relaxed downstairs, reading a book. It was shortly before 9 p.m., the baritone tick-tick-tick of their grandfather clock mourning the passing seconds. The clock was the only noise to be heard, at least until the knocking started. Jane leapt to her feet. The front door, within view from where she stood, seemed to vibrate with each thud. She wanted to run away, to hide upstairs until the sound ceased. But then, eyes wide as a hunted doe, she heard a voice from the other side. A man called out and told her he was a police officer. She inched closer to the door, asking why he was there. He responded with a shout. "For heaven's sake, bring me a light. We have caught Spring-Heeled Jack here in the lane." Jane set aside her fear and rushed to grab a candle before throwing open the door. She was greeted by a tall, cloaked man, his face obscured in shadow. A gust of night air swept through the doorway. Jane shivered. Her mouth opened, but no words came, just a puff of snow-spackled breath. He discarded his cloak, and when he took the candle from her hands, she felt something, a strange scratch. Glancing down, she saw a speck of blood on one of her fingers, and a pair of metallic claws wrapped around the candle. She reeled back in horror. The man held the candle aloft, letting it illuminate his face. There stood the most hideous person she'd ever seen. He was ghastly. He was stomach-churning. He was a real ugly piece of work. His skin was gray as London fog, lips blue, jaw hanging slack to reveal blades of teeth. With his long face and drooping mouth, he was a ghost-face mask come to life. Worst of all, his eyes looked like red balls of fire. They stared right through her as if they'd burned a hole. When Jane, feeling faint, took several bumbling steps back, the man appeared to vomit fire, blue and white flames projectiling out of his mouth. Jumping toward her, he caught Jane in his claws and pulled her down the steps by the back of her neck. She struggled against him, eventually fighting her way out of his grasp, but by the time she reached the top step, he had taken hold of her again. As his claws raked through her hair, tearing off a large chunk, her sister Susan came running through the house. She arrived just in time to see the beastly boy scamper away, her screaming sister left bleeding on the steps. Thankfully, Jane survived the attack, coming away with only minor injuries, and a Pandora's box of questions. Chief among them, of course, was who had committed this crime, but also what had committed this crime. What of Jane's ripped dress and torn hair, the cuts and scrapes she attributed to claws? What of the fire-breathing, fire-eyed creature she described? Though stories of Spring Hill Jack had been circulating for months, with several people claiming to have encountered him, the Jane Alsop attack was the first case to be investigated by police. Nothing came of it. The assailant wasn't found, not even when Jane's father offered a hefty cash reward. As for the suspect's supposed supernaturality, investigators dismissed the idea, chalking up the more outlandish details of Jane's description to the girl having been in a state of shock. Or maybe her memory had been warped by fear, or maybe she was drunk, or maybe she was suffering from some kind of corset-induced, oxygen-deprived hallucination. Whatever the case, police believe the attacker was a human like any other, which is perhaps all the more frightening. However, while no one was ever charged with the crime, there were suspects and theories, but we'll circle back to that topic later. For now, we need to talk about what happened to Lucy Scales. Less than 2 weeks after the Jane Alsop attack, Spring Hill Jack struck again. This time, it was Lucy, another 18-year-old London girl. She had been walking through an alleyway en route to her home when suddenly he appeared. The tall, thin, cloaked figure shot something, a ball of fire or flash of light, directly at Lucy's face. The quantity of blue flame, as she'd later describe it, momentarily blinded her. She collapsed, suffering a seizure as she laid on the ground. Hearing her scream, her brother, whose house she'd just been visiting, rushed to her aid. But of course, by the time he reached her, the assailant had already fled the scene. In subsequent interviews with police, Lucy said the man had thrown off his cloak to reveal a small lamp, and claimed to have seen him breathe blue fire. The Lucy Scales report was actually the third sighting of Spring Hill Jack that month. Just a few days earlier, another person had answered the door to a cloaked man who pulled off his hood and exposed a monstrous face. The attacks on Jane and Lucy were both investigated by James Leah, revered as London's then-best detective. According to the podcast Unresolved in their episode on Spring Hill Jack, quote, Detective Leah reportedly watched an experiment at the London hospital that helped to show the blue flames weren't proof of a supernatural being, but rather a man able to create fire. As a result of the experiment, it was concluded that Jack was able to create fireballs by blowing through a tube in which spirits of wine, sulfur, and another ingredient were deposited and ignited. But while detectives maintained that these vexing encounters had a rational explanation, the public wasn't convinced. This was, after all, 1838. Only a couple of decades earlier, at the turn of the 19th century, Londoners had developed a belief that ghosts roamed the streets in search of passers-by to attack. Could Jack be one such spirit? Perhaps he was a distant relative, or second coming, of the so-called Hammersmith ghost. Both were described as tall, cloaked figures clad in all white clothes. Or perhaps someone had been so inspired by the Hammersmith ghost that they decided to embody a folkloric fiend of their own creation. In January of 1938, a month before Jane Alsop and Lucy Scales were attacked, the mayor of London received an unusual letter. Signed only a resident of Peckham, the note cautioned Lord Mayor Sir John Cowan about the dangers of Spring Hill Jack, saying, It appears that some individuals of, as the writer believes, the highest ranks of life, have laid a wager with a mischievous and foolhardy companion, that he durst not take upon himself the task of visiting many of the villages near London in 3 different disguises, a ghost, a bear, and a devil, and moreover that he will not enter a gentleman's gardens for the purpose of alarming the inmates of the house. The wager has, however, been accepted, and the unmanly villain has succeeded in depriving 7 ladies of their senses, 2 of whom are not likely to recover but to become burdens to their families. At one house the man rang the bell, and on the servant coming to open door, this worse-than-brute stood in no less dreadful figure than a spectre clad most perfectly. The consequence is that the poor girl immediately swooned, and has never from that moment been in her senses. The affair has now been going on for some time, and, strange to say, the papers are still silent on the subject. The writer has reason to believe that they have the whole history at their finger ends, but, through interested motives, are induced to remain silent. Or, to translate into modern parlance, Springtrap was on the prowl, and as long as he was lurking, the residents of London were in as much danger as the security guards at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. The mayor was unmoved by the letter, but after he shared it with the audience at a Mansion House public session, news outlets reported on it, and he received many more. In these notes, residents from various parts of London confided their fears and the stories they'd heard about demon men hunting humans. For a while after this, and especially after the highly publicized Jane Alsop attack, the papers and gossips of London were abuzz with monster mania. Copycats soon sprang up, making it difficult to discern what else the real Jack had done after leaving Lucy Scales convulsing in that alleyway. Had he continued his spree, or had he vanished? There were plenty more sightings and stories, but most seemed like tall tales that had spread throughout England in a countrywide game of telephone. None of those fictions can answer the big question, the beating black heart at the center of this saga. Who was he? There isn't a definitive answer, but we do have... Henry de la Poer Beresford was the Marquess of Waterford, though to many he was better known as the Mad Marquis. A drunkard with a penchant for vandalism, odd humor, violence, and pranks, he was one of the earliest Spring Hill Jack suspects. The eccentric aristocrat was a playboy. In fact, his raucous behavior led to him literally painting the town red, an incident that's believed to be the origin of the phrase. As referenced in the letter sent to the mayor, rumor had it that members of the aristocracy were involved with, and perhaps responsible for, the Spring Hill Jack mystery. If true, the Mad Marquis seemed a likely culprit. An article from 1838, published by the Hobart Town Courier, pondered whether or not Beresford would suffer for his transgressions after his criminal mischief had previously been brushed under the rug. Arguing that the uproarious Marquis, as the headline called him, should be taken to task for his nocturnal vagaries, the writer added that Beresford's name, in many quarters, is regarded with as much terror as that of Spring Hill Jack himself. It was not outside the realm of possibility for someone like Beresford, with all the resources and connections at his disposal, to have rigged some proto-moon shoes and learned some trickery involving fire. However, there's no concrete evidence tying Beresford to the Jack attacks, only rumors and conjecture. It's also worth noting that sightings of Spring Hill Jack continued even after the Marquis left England, and after he died. But that doesn't necessarily clear him, considering all the copycats, as well as the possibility that he hadn't worked alone. Years later, in 1880, the author and Reverend E. Cobham Brewer confidently declared Beresford the original Spring Hill Jack. In his book, The Reader's Companion, Character Sketches of Romance, Fiction, and the Drama, Brewer had a section about Jack, in which he wrote, "The Marquis of Waterford, in the early part of the 19th century, used to amuse himself by springing on travelers unawares, to terrify them, and from time to time others have followed his silly example." Still, there are more suspects to consider. 2 suspects in particular. A bricklayer and a carpenter, both of whom were interrogated for hours in connection with the Jane Alsop attack. Police theorized the men had worked together, which could explain some of the case's strange details, such as the fact that the discarded cloak was gone by the time police arrived, even though the attacker hadn't collected it. But what was far more damning was the witness testimony of James Smith. He claimed to have run over to the Alsop's house upon hearing Jane scream, at which point he spotted Mr. Payne and Thomas Milbank, the bricklayer and carpenter respectively, retreating from the scene. Supposedly, the clothes worn by Milbank matched the description Jane gave of the attacker. Later that evening, Smith saw the duo again, and this time he alleged that they followed him after Milbank randomly asked, "What have you to say, Spring Jack?" But the waters were muddied when a different witness came forward, a man identified only as Mr. Richardson, who said that while he had seen Payne and Milbank in the area during the time frame of the attack, he didn't think they were responsible. Why? Because he'd also seen 2 others lurking there, at the right place and the right time, and he believed they were the real culprits. One was a cloaked man, the other a young boy. As Richardson passed them, the man made a strange joke, saying something about Spring Hill Jack paying their street a visit. The identity of this man, if he even existed, was never determined. And then, of course, there are the supernatural theories. Ghosts, demons, aliens, cryptids, all were suggested and considered at some point, blamed by believers, though doubted by skeptics. Others regard the Spring Hill Jack story as just another urban legend, potentially an episode of mass hysteria. Regardless, Jack had secured himself a place in the public consciousness, becoming the latest boogeyman to frighten Victorian children. Over the next several decades, more people would claim to have encountered him, but reports varied. Many of them described spectral animals, such as a white bear or white bull, a far cry from the lanky, cloaked man of yesteryear. Perhaps Jack was an immortal shapeshifter, perhaps these were elaborate copycats, or perhaps the creatures were, just wild animals. Whatever the case, the stories continued to swell until the last purported sighting, recorded in September of 1904, nearly 70 years after he first appeared. Beast or Beelzebub, sorcerer or magician, the legend of Jack made for a compelling story. But even the best stories have to end.
I hear the sound of him bounding around on the rooftops of London, leaving the people bewildered and stunned, on occasion aflame.
Good old Spring Hill Jack has had a lasting pop culture impact. You could even say he hopped his way into our hearts, and our closets, and under our beds, all the way to our darkened alleyways, and refused to leave. He starred in a number of penny dreadfuls, as you might have already clocked based on all the covers displayed throughout this video. He also made appearances in many other forms of 19th century English entertainment, such as plays and street theater. In fact, when the devil popped up in Punch and Judy shows, he was sometimes given the name Spring Hill Jack. Even in contemporary times, Jack's long-legged shadow continues to linger, having appeared in an eponymous novel by Philip Pullman and an installment of the Assassin's Creed series. But his biggest claim to fame might be the rumor that he, or at least the way he was depicted in some penny dreadfuls, served as inspiration for Batman. Just think, a world without Spring Hill Jack might have also been a world without Batman. I shudder to imagine it. But while the pop cultural imprints remain from Jack's days of jumping all over London, the man himself seems to have hung up his cloak and extinguished his flames many moons ago, likely before most of the supposed sightings even occurred. In general, that's a good thing. We certainly don't need the Tim Burton version of Satan bouncing up to random 18-year-olds and blowing fire on their face. And yet, it's a pity that modern weirdos don't take a page out of their precursor's playbook by donning a costume and a quirk, perhaps learning a magic trick or two, before they set off to menace society. Should they be terrorizing strangers? No, of course not. But if they're going to, then they really ought to do it with some whimsy, some wackiness, and a smidge of theatricality. Say what you will about him, but Spring Hill Jack was a master at that. He had the spirit not of Batman, but one of Gotham City's colorful villains. Man, myth, legend. Even now, nearly 200 years since he first wildfired his way through London, his mystique still tantalizes. There's a craving to explore that intersection of reality and superstition, to see with our own eyes, to explain away the impossible. We can't stop ourselves from wondering who he was, what he was, why he was. It's unnerving to be left with questions, but at least we can rest easy knowing that, while the mystery isn't solved, the case was put to bed long ago. Spring Hill Jack, for whatever he used to be, is now just a phantom, a faded picture. An oddity to be sure, but not a threat. Not anymore. Now he exists only within the confines of our campfire stories. Or does he?